My name is Louis Dumont. Thanks to Alex, Kevin and Michael and the rest of the crew for inviting me on to do this talk. I co-founded a small studio called Formation about 7 years ago. And I'd just like to talk about how EEVEE recently particularly has become a bit of a lifesaver for us. To go back, I started with started 7 years ago a studio called Formation with a guy called John Reedy. We originally came from ad agencies and digital agencies, and we thought we would break off and create our own kind of small production company that can still act like a kind of internal production company to these larger either production companies or agencies. And so kind of because we already knew what they wanted and stuff, so we felt like we're in a good position to do so. We produce lots of different things, lots of sort of interactive things, particularly because that's where I came from originally, doing interaction design with the whole .com boom stuff, but also linear animation. And we used a lot of Maya and Lightwave primarily, and After Effects and Flash and all that kind of stuff. The type of jobs we'd get as well would be vastly different from one brief to the next. Sometimes they would be like something as small as like little banner ads and stuff, and other times it'd be like full-blown VR projects or games on Facebook, or sometimes TV spots, those kind of things. So we had to really kind of be thinking on our feet. And at the time, because we were using things like Maya and Lightwave, we kind of had to restrict ourselves quite a bit to the type of projects we would do. And we would, I say we wouldn't overpromise, but we would, but we'd end up working, you know, super late or weekends to get these things done. It's just another quick project. So I started using Blender in 2018. Although I opened it in 2002 and then got incredibly scared and closed it down again, spending most of my time just sort of sliding open new windows and not understanding fully how to close them. And so just got frustrated and gave up. But ever since seeing, I guess it was the promotional material for EEVEE initially that got me incredibly excited, because I'm like, oh, damn, you can produce these kind of real-time renders in the viewport without having to jump out to different game engines, or you know, you're in the authoring environment and you don't have to leave it. That sounds fantastic. So I was forced to use Blender initially because of a job that required some real-time graphics for WebGL. So they're using the GLTF exporter from Blender, which was, I think there was one for Maya at the time, but the one for Blender was much more sort of feature-rich, and it seemed a hell of a lot more stable. So yeah, I started to get into Blender, and then I realized that this was at 2.79 stage. I realized that it had GPU rendering, and this was fantastic. And this went a hell of a lot faster than the kind of CPU rendering we were doing in the past, particularly as we were sort of spending quite a bit on render farms and stuff. So yeah, that brings me on to the type of projects I want to talk about today. And they are all projects that I think would really not have been possible without EEVEE. The first one being Electric Playbox. So about 7 years ago, we produced a project for Intel, which was this kind of, it was an installation, and it had these kind of video panel walls, and we had to produce animation for it. And we produced it in After Effects, and it nearly killed us. You know, we had to upgrade all of the machines. There was no sort of immediate feedback to the animation, so you were kind of guessing on exports, and plus actually experiencing it there felt incredibly different as well, and we felt really restricted. You know, the resolutions we had to produce were out of this world. So not long ago, a person through a friend came to me and asked if we could produce something similar. So this was a company called Electric Playbox, and they do these really cool kind of interactive rooms. And as you can see here, they mainly consist of 4 HD projectors or slightly above HD projectors that are mounted to the ceiling, and they project content across all 4 walls. And they wanted 3D intros for all of the little games and stuff that you'd be playing. Initially, I was incredibly scared, because we're talking about over 8,000 pixels across, and to produce that without things grinding to your knees, it was a hell of a task, and the time frame as well, I think. And for the initial one was like a couple of weeks. So before sort of getting to grips with Blender and EEVEE, I'd just said, nah, this is too much. This is crazy. But now we have EEVEE and we use it quite a lot. It became a fairly easy task. There were slip-ups. We had to do our best to integrate as much as possible into EEVEE. So rather than sort of taking it out and compositing it in another program, which would just sort of add that extra cycle of time to it, we'd try and get everything in there. So you can see here with the face here, that's all sort of animated with transparent layers on top of each other within EEVEE itself. We lent on volumetrics quite a lot as well, because it just looks nice. Other issues we came across with the wireframe rendering was things like, usually I jumped to the wireframe modifier, but for some reason that just ground the viewport to a halt. So instead we had to basically use a way of resetting the UVs. So for each object we brought in, because we were bringing in London landmarks as well that were quite high polygon, we reset all of the UVs to 0 to 1, and then just used, I think you can see down in the bottom right, we just used like a cube with a white border in, it just mimics a wireframe kind of look, and that sped up the interface like crazy. Yeah, a lot of the stuff as well we produced initially in VR, which was very interesting. Some of the stuff here, like the spaceship, was sculpted, not sculpted, sorry, but modeled in, what's the program called? Gravity Sketch. And that was super handy to give you the feeling of, a large space immediately through a VR headset, in this case, an Oculus Rift. And brought that straight into Blender, and didn't even really need to retopologize stuff because it was all sort of sub-D stuff anyway. And yeah, that along with the new VR tools as well, which I think were introduced in Blender 2.83, has been a super handy way for just sort of prototyping what we were ultimately going to produce for these 4 large projector rooms, basically. We would also produce, we did like a whole, like a couple of weeks of just producing fun stuff as well. Let me just skip to that if I find it. Which was just putting together ideas that we thought, yeah, what would look cool? If you had a room full of all walls full of visuals, what would be kind of cool in that kind of pod room situation? So these were produced in like a day or 2 maybe, and relied heavily on image textures and again volumetrics quite a lot, because that just seems to give you the feeling of depth without it necessarily having any depth, because when you're in the room as well, you can shift left and right, and of course the camera doesn't, so you have to have this sort of not indistinct perspective, so it doesn't feel like you're grounded in anything. And for rendering these, we're talking a couple of seconds a frame. Yes, we have to do it 4 times for each camera, for each wall, but ultimately it was so much faster than what we could have thought. And we did end up using the command line as well. So we have a few workstations with multiple GPUs in, and I kind of want to get a workstation with 4 GPUs in for particularly these kind of jobs, because you can just assign one scene to a GPU and and let it go, and then you are done. You're rendering stuff within a few hours, which is pretty amazing. Okay, the next project, this is one called Microsoft ARville. Originally a company called Media Nerd approached us to create this concept for a learning platform for Microsoft products. This was to be produced for mobile phones of various specs. So I think the lowest spec phone was pretty rudimentary, so it had to be very low poly detail, low poly stuff. But it was all for WebGL, so it was an AR platform online, and it was platform or sort of phone agnostic, so it could be iOS or through your browser if you had a camera hooked up to it, so it would work anywhere. And producing things again for this was super easy, as I'm sure a lot of you know, with game assets, because you can preview kind of how it's going to look. And with PBR rendering being fairly synonymous between all these different platforms, what you see in EEVEE's viewport is kind of what you're going to get in the game engine. And we did do further testing as well through Sketchfab, because they have their pretty awesome VR and AR tools. Not quite as slick as the one that was finally integrated into this one, but we didn't really have access to a build environment or anything like that. So it was great to be able to see pretty much what you're going to see for the final result. Any other points on that? Yeah, again, we used VR to mock stuff up as well. We use sort of tilt brush and medium and gravity sketch just to get a feel for the form and stuff. And that's why I'm super excited as well for this sort of further integration with VR and Blender. It seems really exciting. Okay, next project is nowhere near as exciting. It's a film that was shot to promote a medical company. So we've been experimenting with doing visual effects just completely through EEVEE, even to some extent compositing things in the viewport instead of using the compositor. This is just a few tests that I thought I'd throw in as well. And that's all within EEVEE, match moved, everything within Blender and EEVEE. So this project was, we were approached by a company called Grammar Film, and they do these really cool kind of documentary-based promotional things. And one of which was this one for a medical company. And they basically went and shot this whole film. And the company came back and said, oh, by the way, we have changed our logo. Can you change that on all of the clips you have with the current logo on? And they came to us and said, oh yeah, well, can you do this logo replacement stuff? And as you can see, if I can just rewind this, a lot of these logos are on boxes behind sort of cling film and various labels and packaging and stuff like that. And it has the possibility to be a nightmare, particularly again because this was one of these super fast turnaround type jobs. But again, EEVEE to the rescue. The kind of feedback, I think, let me just forward ahead. Yeah, so simple kind of modeling and stuff, but a lot of the kind of useful stuff was that immediate feedback you get through EEVEE. So it became easier, instead of like going in and like masking out each logo and stuff like that. It just became easier to recreate these large chunks of the set or props in this case, packaging materials and stuff like that, to recreate it just completely in 3D. And bear in mind as well, these shots, they're going to be on screen for like a couple of seconds, if that. I'm just showing you some of the node setup stuff here. Pretty simple, just a few kind of noise procedurals to get that nice stretched look. And the only other one that they really didn't like was some of the machinery had bits of scratches and stuff all over it, and they wanted to remove those. So in much the same way we did the match moving and stuff in Blender. We just created a piece of geometry, mocked together an HDR that looked roughly similar to the surrounding environment that the metal would have picked up, and just replaced the whole thing. It became a hell of a lot easier. So going forward, I think we're going to be using EEVEE as a renderer for more VFX stuff, particularly when it comes to little film jobs where they just want kind of clean up bits and bobs. It becomes super handy for that really fast turnaround stuff. And the final one is an animation I really like doing, which is for Google, and it's called the Indie Showcase, which basically highlights all of their kind of most successful or talented developers and the games they have produced for Google Play in any year. And this was originally a 2D illustration that we brought in the kind of base shapes via SVG into Blender, and started setting up the scene. There was the character is called Mr. Blobby. No, sorry, Blobby, not Mr. Blobby. That's a different character. And he had certain brand guidelines to go with him. So there was this kind of highlight that needed to be just so, and we had to kind of devise a shader that would, again, it's simple things. It's sort of like using Fresnel to mask out some nice sort of specular highlights, but it had to, look just right. And even then in EEVEE, with the limits that are there, it was still quite easy to put together. So everything else was through all the animation and stuff through Blender again. I think the rig was via Rigify, which had the advantage of the stretchy limbs, which this character being a sort of ever-changing yeah, you can see there, he's sort of like stretching his limbs to pick things up and doing all these kind of things. Yeah, really fun to put together and really quick. And as you can see from the viewport, the feedback, again, is really good. And I think it came to the last couple of days of the project where I was under the assumption that the deliverables were just an HD video file. The client said, oh, these are getting projected, big for the event. So we're going to need 4K for that. And again, a couple of years ago, that would have probably given me some sort of heart condition. But now with EEVEE, each frame rendered in maybe 5 seconds, and the 4K stuff took 20 seconds a frame. And for what is ultimately like a minute, like a 60-second spot, it's not that bad, really. Yeah, that's about it, really. Thanks for watching. If you do want to find out more, the company I work for is WeAreFormation, weareformation.com, and my Twitter handle is @LouisDumont. So yeah, thanks for watching.